Hello, Advents! Logan here, and welcome back to the One Last Adventure devlog. The first one, in fact. If you have been wondering where I am, I made a whole other video about that. You can find it wherever the info card is. I don't know why I left or my right now. But that is beside the point. We're not here for where I've been. We're here for where I've been. So as you might know, my whole goal for this was to try and cover what the game needs to be and what the game doesn't need to be, which I covered in week 1. However, I have tried making this video about 5 different ways, and I have settled that the best way to make this video is to just use the video I already made, because Past Logan has just put this so much more eloquently than I ever could. So I'm just gonna let Past Logan take this away, and then if something needs an update or a correction, then I will jump in and give that. Alright, to you, Past Logan! Hello, Advents. Logan here. I know I've been gone for a while. Forget about all of that. We're making a game! This is a devlog for One Last Adventure. I just wanted to document the process as I went along. Unfortunately, I also forgot that I wanted to do this, so I'm actually writing this a week late, recording this 2 weeks late. Either way, the main point is, things are not as fresh in my mind as I would have liked. I actually wrote the first part of week 2 first, so that I could sort of differentiate what took place when. I actually thought it was on week 3 when I started writing this, so, that should tell you how scattered everything has been organized in my brain. Anyway, strap in, this is going to be a long video. The story concept behind One Last Adventure is actually one that I've had for a while now, for a couple of years in fact. I kept going back and forth on how I wanted to release this story. I actually got RPG Maker in hopes to make it, and I did fool around in the engine a bit to get to know it. I found a battle system that I really like, which I'll get back to later. And things happened in real life. I got the idea benched and pondered, refined it, considered making it into a book, animation, live action series until recently, where I learned my job is potentially in jeopardy, and the thing that I would need to do to keep my job would also quite possibly necessitate me losing my job temporarily anyway. So with all that information, my options kind of opened up, and I decided, hey, if I can make a successful game within a year, I could potentially pursue that as a career, thus fulfilling my desire to entertain people as a job, and aside from a few test things I made, I hadn't really done anything with RPG Maker, and it would really be a waste to not at least release one game with it. Pause. So, while this was true at the time, it is now very much no longer true. I am now in a secure job position. That is sort of why I chose to go into the sort of development process at the time. I thought that I would have a lot more options opening up, but if you saw my previous video, then you know that that's just not what happened. So that is what it is. That being the case, I am now in almost my 3rd year now of developing this game. So now it's gonna take however long it takes to finish, and that changes a few things that I talk about later on down the road. Some of which I don't. There's a few things that very, very recently I've sort of weighed the options of, but we'll get to that later, if I remember. So I set about refreshing myself with how to make the best RPG Maker game I could, and as I listened, I realized immediately that I had one major problem. That I was using RPG Maker. I feel like anyone using this engine or is familiar with the engine knows what I mean, but there are a lot of just terrible games made with RPG Maker, and even the ones that are okay tend to fall into various traps that bring their games down, even if they have a great story. So I spent, I would say, the first day or two researching various pitfalls to avoid and strategies to increase the odds I would be able to stand out and not get lost in the sea of mediocrity. So, what's on the list? Number 1, great story. Number 2, combat can't be done out of box. Number 3, amazing music. Number 4, all the sound effects. Number 5, keep the scale reasonable. Number 6, explorability. Going point by point, great story. You can have garbage gameplay, you can have a game with no combat. A game with a great story can carry a game quite a ways. As I said before, it can't always save a game, but it does go a long way. For proof, I look to Freebird Games. A lot of people like to single out To the Moon, but really every game I have played, every one of the SibCorp series, the Mirror Lied, which may actually be in that series, every one of Kangar's games have been driven by an amazing story. And that is in spite of a fairly linear form of gameplay. A good story is absolutely vital for an RPG Maker game to be noticed. I'm not going to get into the story here where I can avoid it, but I think I have a good story concept with One Last Adventure. There are a lot of story concepts I have come up with, all with varying degrees of potential to be good. For now, let's just say there's a reason I chose this one. Next, combat can't be out of box. For the uninitiated, RPG Maker has a turn-based combat system, extremely reminiscent of earlier Final Fantasy games, especially Final Fantasy I, which lends people to making random encounters because that's the kind of formula that those kind of turn-based games are based on. There are 2 problems with this. The first problem is, unless you have knowledge of how to do it well, it is difficult to make turn-based combat engaging. The second is that even if you manage to do that, the repetition that random encounters exude often make the combat encounters tedious. I am under the impression that when it comes to your 2D RPGs, no one likes random encounters, and for the most part, same goes for turn-based combat. Later iterations of Final Fantasy tried to spice it up with an ATB system. A lot of people say it was an improvement. I humbly disagree. I absolutely hate everything about ATB. What I don't hate, however, is Arc the Lad. Final Fantasy Tactics uses a similar system, but Arc the Lad did it first, and more importantly, closer to what I would want to replicate. In fact, I did replicate it in an earlier test game with a plugin I made with Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn? Harley Quinn? Harley Quinn. It works really well. The only thing with it is I've had a lot of problems recreating the same battle twice within the plugin. But that's fine. No one likes random encounters anyway. I don't like them, and it's around this time that I actually started doing a lot of encounter building for a D&D campaign. And it dawned on me that every encounter I do in my D&D games is planned, and there is no reason I couldn't use planned encounters and milestone leveling for my game. In fact, it was around this time I decided that I would try and use 5e as a template moving forward, as I have become very familiar with the system. More on that later. Third, amazing music. Again, Freebird Games, Undertale, Deltarune, Touhou embodiment of the Scarlet Devil, the early Final Fantasy games. These games have amazing, iconic scores, some of them transcending the games themselves, and all of them use their music very effectively. Admittedly, this is probably one of those areas that I am most afraid of not being able to nail. But I did end up finding someone who would be available to do the score at a reasonable price. More on that later, but given the choices that I ended up making a bit later on, which we'll get to, it put me in a really tough place where music is concerned.
Pause. So the information there needs an update. The person I was referencing there, I was really looking forward to working with. However, one of my voice actors came along, or the voiceover artists came along. They said that they could do the music basically for free, as long as they got the distribution rights. So any money that comes from the soundtrack, they would get that cut. They would get the rights to put out the music however they so choose. I wasn't about to pass this up because this game is already on a shoestring budget, right? So yeah, that's kind of where that stands. The challenges that I alluded to are still very much present, and we're still very much going to cover those, but I have every confidence that this artist can conquer those, and we can make just a really great soundtrack that goes really well with the game.
Fourth, sound effects. Toasty Time on YouTube used to be an RPG Maker connoisseur until he both got burnt out, pun not intended, and in my humble opinion lost faith in the RPG Maker community. Not that I blame him. Regardless, one of his biggest complaints about RPG Maker games he would play is the underutilization of sound effects. And the thing is, it's not like it's that difficult. I've heard advice in one of the videos he made as a collaboration with Studio Blue, which was to go through every level of your game and list all the things that would make noise. Once you've made that list, put those sounds in your games. Sound advice, pun intended this time, and advice that I will absolutely be harking to when I get to that point. Fifth, scale. A lot of RPG makers, I think, fall into the trap of thinking that because the system is so easy to use, you can make whatever you want. And from that thought process, scale gets out of hand, both in terms of maps and in terms of features people want to add to the games. So with that in mind, I will, keep the scale down and just make sure not to overreach myself. I mean, keep things as simple as possible and make absolutely sure I don't make too many maps, right guys? I want to make sure that I don't want the game to get too big, because that will cause all sorts of problems. So whatever I do, I need to make sure that the scale does not get out of hand. We'll get back to this later. I know I'm saying that a lot. Lastly, explorability. Seeing as I don't want to make my game super combat heavy, I got to thinking, what is it that makes non-combat focused games engaging, apart from the story? The Sid Corp series again comes to mind, as well as Undertale, Deltarune, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Kingdom Hearts 3, and Death Stranding. For a lot of these games, exploration is the glue that holds these games, or levels, together. Another aspect of the game that I feel like I will absolutely need to nail because of some of the choices that I made, which we will get to. Say it with me now. Actually, let's discuss some of the decisions that I made that ultimately put me in conflict with a handful of these points. Firstly, when I came up with the idea originally, I wanted to make it a modern fantasy, a la Final Fantasy 15. I really like aspects of a good fantasy elements with a modern setting, but as I thought some of my key points of the story, I realized if I did modern fantasy, I would actually have a harder time justifying some of the choices that I would make later, and it wouldn't necessarily fit well within the overall narrative. So that settles it then. Traditional fantasy RPG. Well, not so fast. Though that could work, I feel like that would work against me in the spirit of standing out from other RPG Maker games. So that leaves me with I can't be too old and I can't be too new. Well, around this time, the little animation came out of YouTube. Some of you may have heard it, probably not though. It was just a small little pilot of a show called Lackadaisy. And all this to say, I didn't choose a 1930s theme originally when I set out, nor did I pick it because Lackadaisy is popular, but I don't think that I could say that Lackadaisy didn't inspire me or steer me in a direction. I didn't copy them, it just had an impact on me when I was at a bit of a choice point. So there I have it, 1930s fantasy, which to my knowledge hasn't really been done before. With that setting came the first challenge of music that I hinted at before. I started looking for some swing music, and I found what is definitely going to become my battle theme. But the other thing is, the majority of this game is still going to take place in a forest. Not only wouldn't that fit well with swing music, hence my concern with being able to find music that would fit, but also it is kind of part of another problem that I hinted at earlier. See, I wanted this game to take place over the course of 3 days. 3 days of walking through the woods. A quick Google search will tell you that the average hiker can hike between 8 and 15 miles a day, and if you dig a bit further, that numbers can get upwards of 30 miles. Breaking that up into feet, that's anywhere between 42,000 to 158,000 feet. If the average person is about 5 feet, one could argue that a tile RPG Maker could also measure 5 feet, another one in the D&D based design column, which would equate anywhere from 8,000 to 31,000 tiles for a day. So much for keeping the scale down. Even taking the minimum number of miles a day and equating that to tiles and, dividing it by 200, assuming a 200 by 200 tile map, that is still a minimum of 42 maps per day. A total of 126 maps. Here's the thing, I did that math before. Originally I arrived at the ludicrous number of 70 maps per day, and writing this out now, I realized that I have bitten off more than I can chew. So as of writing this script, the game has now been downsized to a 2-day adventure, not including a couple of flashbacks that I have planned.
Pause. Okay, remember back at the beginning of the video when I said that because things were, situations have changed, so the game just takes however long it takes? This is one of the changes that it impacts. Because it's going to take however long it takes, and because I don't think that shortening the game would be integral to the story, I don't think that I can in good conscience make it any less than basically that 120 map threshold. I feel like it has to be a 3-day adventure in order to have the full emotional impact that the game has to offer. Now, of course, that comes with the challenge that I'm going to touch on here in a bit of the environment. But yeah, I can't not make it a 3-day adventure. And this is what I've kind of come to realize.
Regardless, that is still an 84 map adventure, with each map being 200 by 200 tiles, and with map that big, I have better figure out how to make each of those maps worth the player's time.
And we'll stop him there. I feel like that's a pretty good update to what I originally released, and yes, I will be /have deleted at this point the week 1 video. So that, I think, covers most of the bases that I wanted to cover. If I was to add anything, it would be the importance of having amazing characters, because you can't afford to have bland characters, especially in a game like this where you have to do everything perfect if you want to be noticed because of the platform that you're using. But honestly, I have nothing but the utmost confidence in the characters that I've created, and I cannot wait to show you all of them in part 3. In part 2, however, I will be discussing, I'll be doing like the recap of my first year of working on the game, basically all the rest of the stuff I made before part 0. I'll probably unlist the rest of the week videos, and I'll just have those linked in part 2 if you want to watch those individually. But in any case, look forward to a recap of my first year in part 2, and then we'll catch you up to where we are now in part 3. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Chill, ladies.